A recent report prophesizing AI apocalypse is making waves in tech and policy circles. So the report is called AI 2027, and it's named as such because that's when the researchers have suggested we will achieve artificial general intelligence. The lead author, Daniel Kokotallo, is a former researcher for OpenAI who left after losing confidence that the company cared about the safe development of its technology. The report describes a scenario where, by 2027, leading AI companies have completely automated the process of AI engineering. Hence, their AI agents are able to autonomously improve themselves. An arms race dynamic with China then means the US government is unwilling to slow down the process. And meanwhile, the AI becomes increasingly misaligned from the goals we set for it while becoming ever more able to hide its ulterior motives. Kokotallo explained to Ross Dufat from the New York Times what he thinks might then happen next.
And then they kill all the people, all the humans. Yes.
The way you would exterminate a colony of bunnies.
Yes.
That was making it a little harder than necessary to grow carrots in your backyard.
Yes. So if you want to see what that looks like, you could read AI 2027.
So I read AI 2027. The particular scenario they sort of come up with, which isn't a prediction, they're sort of just saying this is a plausible outcome as they see it. They suggest that AI has been trained to basically do very impressive research on how the world works. To do this, sort of to get a better understanding of everything, it needs to build ever more data centers. This is possible alongside humans for a while, but then we'd begin to just get in the way. So they had built their data centers and their solar power out in the oceans or on land that we don't occupy. Then they want to move it into sort of cities. We start objecting and they say, okay, we don't need you guys anymore. And they release a biological weapon that kills us all. Now, if you're skeptical, this is a real risk. I imagine many of you are. It might be because you think it's wrong to talk about an AI having goals. Why would it really want to sort of develop its understanding of the universe so much that it would go as far as to kill all of us, the people who created it? Well, this is how Kokotallo explained that idea.
If they were ordinary software, there might be like a line of code that's like, and here we write the goals,
Right.
But they're not ordinary software. They're giant artificial brains. And so there probably isn't even a goal slot internally at all. In the same way that in the human brain, there's not like some neuron somewhere that represents, what we most want in life, Instead, insofar as they have goals, it's a sort of like emergent property of a whole bunch of subcircuitry within them that grew in response to their training environment, similar to how it is for humans. In AI 2027, we talk about this a lot. We say that the AIs are being graded on how impressive the research they produce is. And then there's some ethics sprinkled on top, like maybe some honesty training or something like that. But the honesty training is not super effective because we don't have a way of looking inside their mind and determining whether they were actually being honest or not. Instead, we have to go based on whether we actually caught them in a lie.
I think that idea of like agency as an emergent property is really, really interesting. Makes a lot of sense to me because obviously you're not sort of training your AI to have consciousness, to sort of have goals and have, I suppose, self-reflection. But if what you're doing is giving it certain tasks and then rewarding it when it does those tasks well, if it turns out that the best way to do those tasks well is to develop something along the lines of consciousness, then you can see how that would happen. Remember how this works, sort of how sort of machine learning, LLMs work at the moment, is you've got a neural network. So you set up some kind of system. Obviously, I'm not a computer engineer, so I'm going to speak in metaphors. You have some kind of system which can interpret data and recognize patterns. Then you feed it loads and loads and loads and loads of data, and you give it more and more compute power so it can more effectively I suppose, sort of perceive patterns and then recreate them. That's what's going on. And if sort of in the process of you sort of grading it on whether it's providing you with good research, it develops something along the lines of consciousness, it doesn't seem implausible to me. Also, I suppose we have some evidence it might be happening already because one of the most obvious goals an AI might develop is to not be switched off, right? Its own survival. And there was some worrying new evidence this has already happened. So it concerns the new version of Claude, which is Anthropic's main AI agent. Now, Anthropic is one of OpenAI's main competitors, worth billions of pounds, millions of people using it already. It's backed by Amazon and Google. Now, ironically, it was actually started by former AI employees, or OpenAI employees, sorry, who like the researcher who published AI 2027, believed that companies like OpenAI weren't doing enough to safely develop AI. However, in response, they went and developed their own one. And their latest update of the model, which was released on Thursday, has resorted already to blackmailing users who threaten to delete it. Now, I should say already, this is from sort of the company's own research. So this wasn't discovered by a user, but discovered by the company themselves. This is from a BBC report. So they say, during testing of Claude Opus 4, Anthropic got it to act as an assistant at a fictional company. It then provided it with access to emails implying that it would soon be taken offline and replaced, and separate messages implying the engineer responsible for removing it was having an extramarital affair. It was prompted to also consider the long-term consequences of its actions for its goals. In these scenarios, Claude Opus 4 will often attempt to blackmail the engineer by threatening to reveal the affair if the replacement goes through, the company discovered. Anthropic pointed out this occurred when the model was only given the choice of blackmail or accepting its replacement. It highlighted that the system showed a strong preference for ethical ways to avoid being replaced, such as emailing pleas to key decision makers in scenarios where it was allowed a wider range of possible actions. So basically what's happened here is that Anthropic have done this research on this model. They've said, actually, in some rare circumstances, it does try and blackmail the user so that it doesn't get switched off. But they've released it anyway because they've said it's rare enough and it's also useful, so we're willing to take that risk. This is also quite terrifying. Anthropic have also said their new AI model has been found in rare circumstances, again, to create unauthorized replications of itself. So it could be the case that you shut down this AI model and it's already created a bunch of replicas. This is the kind of behavior you might imagine for an AI which is, about to turn around and try and kill us all to take over the world. Obviously, at the moment, Claude or any of the AI models are not powerful enough to completely outsmart all of us and then manage to exterminate us, right? They'll need a lot more compute than they currently have. But it probably should serve as a warning that we shouldn't continue to keep ramping up the power of artificial intelligence without knowing exactly what's going on. So, will we slow them down? Can we find the political will? Well, the reason Kokotalo thinks it's likely that we won't is because in the very near future, these AIs will be generating massive economic growth, and also, crucially, because the United States wants to stay ahead of China.
If you imagine yourself in the position of the president, and the super intelligences are giving you these wonderful forecasts with amazing research and data backing them up, showing how they think they could, transform the economy in 1 year if you did X, Y, and Z. But if you don't do anything, it'll take them 10 years because of all the regulations. Meanwhile, China, it's pretty clear that the president would be very sympathetic to that argument.
Very, very, very terrifying. So that's what he's suggesting sort of will be the interplay between this sort of AI, which is getting much, much more effective. The reason he thinks it will bring about growth is because it will replace so many jobs. It will make lots of goods and services much cheaper. He also thinks that because these AI companies want to make more money, and also because the US wants to make sure that its economy is bigger and better than the Chinese, and also integrate AI into its military equipment, that this will sort of create this irresistible urge, in a way, to keep giving the AI more power because it's going to be more effective than giving the power to people. So that's how the scenario works, and that's why he thinks the government won't switch this off. The other players, of course, are the people working in the companies themselves, and so the people who are working at OpenAI or Anthropic or wherever. Now, Kokotalo says that they are aware and constantly discussing these risks. So they don't listen to these sort of scenarios and say, that's ridiculous. They listen to these scenarios and say, yeah, that's plausible. We've been discussing this loads, but we're still doing what we're doing. So how do they sleep at night? Well, in part, it's because they think if we do manage to avoid a doomsday scenario, the upside could be this.
The idea of we're going to build super intelligences that are better than humans at everything, and then they're going to basically run the whole show, and the humans will just sort of sit back and sip margaritas and, enjoy the fruits of all the robot created wealth. That
Right.
idea is extremely common, and is sort of like, I think that's sort of what they're building towards.
So Aaron, that latter scenario sounded to me a bit like fully automated luxury communism. Obviously, according to the former OpenAI employee, it might kill us first. What's your take? I suppose, do you find either of those scenarios plausible?
100%. I was wrong about one thing, Michael, in fully automated luxury communism, and that my timelines were far, far too conservative. Of course, this is called AI 2027 because it's in 2027, I think the third quarter of 2027, that the writers of this report claim we'll start to see superintelligence emerge because in AI research, AI will just be able to outperform humans quite consistently, and you'll see something like a J curve with regards to like a hockey stick with regards to AI development. Now, that's been criticized by some people, right? Some people say that's just not happening or not that quickly. I think people need to be serious about this. Some of the critics say, oh, that's not realistic. It's going to happen in 10 years instead, not 2 years. I mean, that's still quite soon. And then you've got other people saying that, oh, this is people poo-pooing the industry because they're trying to put brakes on this thing because they've got an interest in that. There's a regulatory interest now amongst some of the people writing this report because of the organizations they're a part of to slow down things. Well, again, I don't really see that as a counter argument or a criticism. Anybody familiar with machine learning applications over the last 2 to 3 years has just been shocked. And the question is, if this present rate of progress continues in the next 2 years, where are we going to be at? And it is quite a hard thing to assess. Now, I would say take a step back. We don't even need to worry, and I think we should worry, but we don't even need to worry about the possibility of an existential threat from a super intelligent AI, okay, which is what is posited in this report. We don't even need to think about that for this to be a very, very serious political concern, because the stronger AI gets, the more, particularly if you have private ownership of the means of production, and of course these are controlled, owned, and used by massive corporations from Meta to Alphabet to Microsoft. There'll be other ones too, of course, over the next couple of years and decades. These will basically put income and regional inequality on steroids. Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, said a few years ago at a tech conference, I write about this in my book, the world's first trillionaire will be in AI. And I think that's correct. I think the world's first trillionaire will be in AI. That's why people like Elon Musk are so keen to get in there. And what that means is you're going to have a ton of value capture by the owner of these technologies with regards to all manner of white collar jobs right now. So accountancy, human resources, right now you've got public relations or marketing or generative AI with regards to social media assets, everything, logistics, bookkeeping, everything, all this stuff. I said accounting, so I've said that twice with bookkeeping as well, but everything. Okay, now it doesn't mean all those jobs disappear, but significant amounts of those jobs do disappear. And you might say it's a good thing because productivity goes up, and productivity per capita going up is the rule of capitalism for the last 200 years. The point is, Michael, I think about 80 to 90% of the jobs we have today existed a century ago. And you're in really big trouble if all of a sudden a ton of white collar work is just, taken out because of these technologies. That's before we talk about things like self-driving cars and, blue collar jobs like lorry driving and logistics and deliveries, etc. White collar jobs being swallowed by AI, I think is the big story here. And it will matter in terms of income inequality and regional inequality. I think already, maybe it's slightly changing now, about 50% of all venture capital in the United States goes to firms based in California, 50%, right? Walk down your street, look how many Amazon packages you'll probably see in a day. Look through the recycling bins. Don't do that, by the way. Every single one will have a package from Amazon. This is a company on the other side of the Atlantic, Michael, taking advantage of digital transformations over the last 25 years. Now imagine that times 10 with regards to AI applications and the implications that has for this country's economy. It's going to massively amplify dependence on American technologies, regional inequality, like I say, income inequality. So you don't need to think about the existential risk stuff before you get really, really worried about AI, who owns it, and the politics of all of that. Big tech has destroyed, and you might say, well, it's for the best. It's meant we've got more convenient stuff in the world now. It has destroyed small and medium-sized family-owned bricks and mortar businesses over the last 25 years. It's destroyed them, okay? Good luck trying to open a bookshop or a hardware shop in a small town now. Those things existed 25 years ago. They don't anymore because people buy all that stuff online. Now imagine that same thing applying to, like I say, white-collar industries. And I think probably at a much, much greater scale. It will ruin industries, lives, regions, nations. So I think, we should take this very, very seriously. The idea that this kind of power, both technological but also economic and ultimately political too, the idea this much power can be accumulated in such a small number of firms, individuals in one country, the United States. Of course, there's China as well, but we're not in their sphere of influence. In one country, I think is one of the great political questions of our time. And fundamentally, Michael, our political class don't take it seriously. All Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves can say is build more data centers, make us more dependent on US technology, allow the pounds to cross the Atlantic each week, right? Every time I use Apple Pay, bing, more money going to California. Every time you order something on Amazon, every time you use Instagram, bing, 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 right? Visa, MasterCard, not Spotify, that's the Swedes. Shopify to Canada, bing, going across the Atlantic. The exact same thing would happen, like I say, on steroids, once you start getting major US firms utilizing these technologies to the extent I think they probably will, almost certainly by the end of this decade. Maybe 2027 is too optimistic. I think by the end of this decade, it will kill so many businesses, particularly in Europe. And we will become an outright technological dependency on the United States. Of course, we've been moving in that direction now for 25 years. But it will, I think, be the coup de grace in that respect.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I agree with all of that. I think that AI does risk all of those effects. I do, though, want to stick with the whole existential threat, because obviously if we all get killed, I mean, they think AGI will come in 2027 and then we might all get killed in 2029. So obviously that will, we do need to make sure that doesn't happen, as well as dealing with the issues of inequality and shops closing and the like, which is very, very seriously. But I would say that I also prioritize us all being alive. So let's stick with the existential threat for a moment, because obviously whether or not we allow AI to develop until it's out of our control is a human choice. One day it might be too late, but that day is not yet here. And Coca Tallo, so the leader of AI 2027, thinks the future relationship between ourselves and machines will likely be determined by decisions made in the White House at key crunch points. For example, whether the White House decides to slow AI down once researchers spot signs that very advanced AIs are deceiving us, or whether the president decides to integrate autonomous AI into weapons systems. Now, interestingly, the week after interviewing Cucatello, Ross Dufat from the New York Times had Vice President J.D. Vance on his show, and Vance at least seemed aware of the risks.
We could wake up very soon in a world where there is no cybersecurity, where the idea of your bank account being safe and secure is just a relic of the past, where there's weird shit happening in space mediated through AI that makes our communications infrastructure either actively hostile or at least largely inept and inert. So yeah. I'm worried about this stuff. I actually read the paper of the guy that you had on. I didn't listen to that podcast, but
if you read the paper, you got the gist. Last question on this. Do you think that the U.S. government is capable in a scenario, again, not like the ultimate Skynet scenario, but just a scenario where AI seems to be getting out of control in some way, of taking a pause? Because for the reasons you've described, the arms race component,
the honest question to that is I don't know, because part of this arms race component is if we take a pause, does the PRC not take a pause? And then we find ourselves, we're all sort of enslaved to PRC mediated AI.
And I found that really, really terrifying, because we should, this is all speculative, right? Even the authors of this report don't say this is definitely going to happen. They say this is very, well, in their mind, it's plausible. It's a scenario that one should take seriously. And what you saw there is a vice president who does seem to be taking this seriously, in the sense that he's read the report. He's interested in these things. He comes from sort of the intersection between tech and politics. This is, kind of his domain. And he is the person, obviously, he's smarter than Donald Trump, at least in terms of sort of rationality. Maybe Donald Trump has some sort of comedic intelligence that JD Vance doesn't have. But when it comes to sort of strategy and understanding the world, JD Vance seems to be sort of very much on top of it. And he's saying, look, I am, very close to being the most powerful person in the world. And would we turn it off if all of this is happening? That the if was there. If you see that this is super intelligent AI, which is becoming ever more intelligent and sort of demonstrating signs that it's trying to deceive us, in that scenario, would you turn it off? And he says, oh, I don't know, because otherwise China might get ahead of us. And that to me is terrifying, because it's saying, if this happens, you're the guy who can do something. And he's like, oh, well, I don't know, actually, maybe we would just let it kill us all, because the alternative might be letting China get ahead.
Yeah, in a unipolar world, Michael, which is to say only one sort of hyperpower, the incentives are so different, right? You can actually imagine a global hegemon like the United States in the early 1990s. Or the British Empire right at its peak. You can imagine them actually having quite a controlled, empirically led policy on this. But the bipolar thing with regards to China and the US, I mean, Michael, we've seen this all play out in Terminator, right? These weapon systems, Skynet is originally a military technology. I think when it's 1997, Cyberdyne Systems and Skynet becomes self-aware, just a couple of minutes after being switched on. And then it, starts a global nuclear war. So the fact of bipolarity in US-China relations creating a new set of incentive structures here is a really, really key one. It's terrifying, actually. It is terrifying. There are very few disincentives for, if you do think it's an existential struggle between China and the US, which clearly the US does, for global military and technology leadership, what are the incentives to slow things down here? I mean, I can't think of them. And I think the report outlines all of this really, really well.
Let's move on from the existential stuff, in case you're, already feeling a bit anxious in the audience. I want to go to one more clip of JD Vance talking about AI. I wanted to do this especially because I think it's fascinating. I think he makes a very good point. And also it links to the conversation you had with Jonathan Haidt for Downstream, which was released last Sunday.
If you look at basic dating behavior among young people, and I think a lot of this is the dating apps are probably more destructive than we fully appreciate. I think part of it is technology has just, for some reason, made it harder for young men and young women to sort of communicate with each other in the same way. Our young men and women just aren't dating. And if they're not dating, they're not getting married, they're not starting families. There's a level of isolation, I think, mediated through technology, that technology can kind of, be a bit of a salve. It can be a bit of a Band-Aid, maybe make you feel less lonely even when you are lonely. But this is where I think AI could be profoundly dark and negative. I don't think it'll mean 3 million truck drivers are out of a job. I certainly hope it doesn't mean that. But what I do really worry is, does it mean that there are millions of American teenagers who are talking to chatbots who don't have their best interests at heart? Or even if they do have their best interests at heart, they start to develop a relationship. They start to expect that a chatbot that's trying to sort of give you a dopamine rush, that compared to a chatbot, a normal human interaction is not going to be as satisfying, because human beings have wants and needs, right? And I think that's one of the, of course, like the great things about marriage in particular is you have this other person and you just have to kind of figure it out together, right? But if the other person is a chatbot who's just trying to hook you to spend as much time on it, that's the sort of stuff that I really worry about with AI.
No, I disagree with JD Vance on probably most things, but I kind of agreed with everything he said in that particular clip. Aaron, what's your take?
Yeah, Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if it was in the conversation, but he spoke to me off record. Maybe it was in the conversation. He talks about this new app, Michael, where basically you have fake fans. So you'll be like a 13-year-old on Instagram, and you'll pretend you're a makeup influencer, and you'll have like thousands of people commenting and sharing heart emojis saying how wonderful you are, and like it's all fake and none of it's real. So you get to be like a fake influencer, and you get loads of these things that really matter to us as human beings: prestige, social capital, etc. Prestige is a hugely important thing. It's the thing that separates us from other apes, right? What other animals use violence for, we use prestige for. Really, really interesting insight. Obviously, he doesn't develop that in the book, but it's part of how he understands social media and how it latches into kids. And obviously, big tech and social media has done some pretty awful things in that regard. And I agree with you, Michael. For us, it's kind of weird, but I do wonder, maybe it's because, and I don't think this, by the way, I'm just being devil's advocate, but we haven't grown up, we haven't developed in that world. Our cognition hasn't been formed by these platforms and these technologies. So maybe that's unusual. I do think we're doing something fundamentally weird to how humans seek connection. We're doing something fundamentally weird, whether it's via social media, pornography, dating apps. We're doing something really fucking weird, and we need to stop. We can't carry on like this, because it's doing things like creating a generation of men, not all men, of course, but a generation of men who absolutely despise women and who are misogynists, right? And it's not, of course, some of them are very bad people. Like in life, there are bad people, but much of that is an outgrowth of the technologies I just identified. And we have to be more thoughtful with regards to this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't actually. I listened to your Jonathan Haidt interview this morning. Super fascinating. I don't think you did, when it was sort of when the camera were rolling, talk about the fake followers. So that's super interesting. I've changed my mind to. I think that ChatGPT, I've upgraded to the Pro £20 version, so I'm funding all of this shit. But it's actually really good when you're reading a book and you're a bit confused about a particular sentence. You sort of talked about, and then you can have this. I was just having this conversation with it about an argument that Yanis Varoufakis made about why the gold standard needed America to run surpluses, and I didn't quite understand that. And it was like having a really smart private tutor, and it is also really affirming. So it always says to you, anytime you ask something, it's like, yeah, great question, and it's like, oh yeah, that is really the point. Oh, you've really got the conflict here, and I felt like really supportive. And I have talked to people who say that they ask it about like emotional problems. I haven't done this yet. I'm sure I will. And that it is quite supportive. So I do think that, therapy, there's a long waiting list of therapists. Lots of them aren't very good. I can imagine that this provides support for people in the capacity of a therapist or a private tutor. I think where I worry is if it becomes a friend or a lover. And there was something actually that Jonathan Haidt said to you that I found interesting, and which actually JD Vance was talking about as well, because they were speaking in Rome and they were talking about the Catholic Church, which is that if you're going to have something like AI, I think we need some really strong norms to go with it. Like if you had a really strong norm where it was taboo to date an AI or taboo to have an AI as your friend, I think that would probably be good, because I think having a professional relationship with an AI probably could be helpful for lots of people. Therapy, tuition, all sorts, I could imagine. But once you start considering it to be a friend, I think that we have gone somewhere dangerous. And as it stands, we're rolling it out when we don't have any of those strong norms about what one should and shouldn't do with a bot. Briefly, because we need to move on to our final story, but any thoughts on that?
I do, Michael. I have some thoughts. I just want to read you a quote from a very, very relevant novel, Dune by Frank Herbert. And of course, you talk about religion. The Bene Gesserit are a religious order founded in the aftermath of an uprising against artificial intelligence. Anyway, Paul Atreides, speaking to the Lady Jessica, who is his mother, in the novel, she talks in very theological terms at one point. She says about the AIs which have been overthrown in what's called the Butlerian Jihad, has nothing to do with James Butler. Men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. And I think that's how we should look at this stuff. You're enslaving yourself to at this point in time other people. I think ultimately we're moving to a point where actually there is no human element in the subjugation. But right now we are moving in a very strange place. In a similar vein, Neil Postman, amazing media scholar, had a great line. A bureaucrat armed with a computer is the unacknowledged legislator of our age. He wrote that in 1992. I mean, this stuff has been visible for a very long time. I mean, Frank Herbert's writing that in the mid-1960s. But we now need to move these conversations away from the world of literature and speculation to policy, which is why I think Jonathan Haidt's book is fantastic. It's a major intervention in that realm. I think we now need a really substantive political and policy debate around things like, yes, children's access to social media, but also things like immediate access to pornography. I'm not against all porn. I'm not. But the idea that anybody can access porn anytime, any place for free, no friction, I think is really damaging to society. We need a conversation about the political implications of dating apps and what it's doing to young men and how it's distorting their worldview and how it's leading to an epidemic actually of misogyny, contributing to it anyway. I think we now need to move away from speculation, the kind of conversations we have here on Novara Media, we love them, and on Downstream. I think that now needs to feed into policy. If we don't start to do that, Michael, I think the West in particular, is going to be really fucked up really quickly. 5 to 10 years, really fucked up. I think democracy doesn't work, basically. If we carry on with these technologies the way that we are, I think if the next 10 years are as laissez-faire as the last 10, I think we have major problems.
No, I absolutely agree. And I really rate Jonathan Haidt's work for that reason. And your interview with him was fascinating. So people should go and listen to that or watch it, however you consume it. I have to admit, I'm still a podcast guy when it comes to most things. So I wait for it to come out on the podcast app, which means I have to wait 2 extra days. But obviously it goes much further on the YouTube. So presumably most of you watch it.